The sound of my walking stick hitting the floorboards is the only thing that commands respect in this house anymore. Tap, tap, tap. It is a rhythm of survival, a metronome counting down the seconds of a life that has become a siege. I am Elias Thorne. I am 82 years old, and I live in the guest room of the mansion I built with my own hands 50 years ago. My son, Julian, calls it downsizing. He says it with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, the kind of smile a shark gives before it drags you under. I call it exile. I am a refugee in the kingdom I constructed, relegated to a room that smells of lavender potpourri and neglect, while my son and his wife occupy the master suite, sleeping in the bed where my wife took her last breath. The stick is made of English oak. It is heavy, knotted, and ugly to anyone who doesn't understand the beauty of resilience. Julian hates it. He hates the noise it makes on the hardwood I laid in 1975. He hates that I drag it across his expensive Italian marble floors, leaving phantom scratches that only he can see. He hates that I cling to it like a lifeline, as if it were the only thing tethering me to the earth. He does not know that he should fear it. He does not know that this piece of wood is the only thing standing between him and a federal prison cell. I sat on the edge of the narrow guest bed, my joints aching with the dampness of the coming rain. The air pressure was dropping, and my knees screamed in protest, a physical reminder of 30 years spent on construction sites. I rubbed the smooth wood of the cane handle, feeling the grain against my thumb. It was grounding. The door flew open. Julian didn't knock. He never knocks. To him, privacy is a luxury reserved for the people who pay the mortgage, and in his delusional mind, that is him. He stormed in, bringing a gust of air that smelled of stale scotch and desperate cologne. He was holding a stack of papers that fluttered in his shaking hands like the wings of a trapped bird. "Today is the day, Dad," he said. His voice was tight, vibrating with a rage he was barely suppressing. It was a tone I recognized. It was the tone of a man who has gambled everything on a pair of deuces and is waiting for the dealer to turn the river card. "The notary is coming at noon," he continued, pacing the small room, his expensive loafers clicking aggressively. "You signed the deed transfer, and we put you in the care facility at Golden Oaks. It's a nice place. They have a garden."
"They have bridge nights." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I looked for the boy I had taught to fish in the creek behind the property. I looked for the teenager I had carried on my shoulders when he twisted his ankle at the state fair. I looked for my son. But I didn't see him. I saw a stranger wearing my son's face. I saw a man of 45 with debt up to his eyeballs and a gambling habit he thought I was too senile to notice. He didn't care about bridge nights. He needed the house equity to pay off loan sharks who didn't accept IOUs. He needed me out of the way, buried in a facility where the sedatives were cheap and the questions were few. "I'm not going to Golden Oaks, Julian," I said. My voice was raspy, worn down by days of silence, but it was steady. I forced it to be steady. I would not give him the satisfaction of hearing a tremor. "And I'm not signing the deed," I added. "This is my home. I poured the foundation. I framed the walls. I am not leaving it." "It's our home," he shouted, stepping closer. He loomed over me, using his height to intimidate, casting a shadow that felt colder than the grave. His face was flushed, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. "I've taken care of you for 3 years," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I've paid the bills. I've cooked your meals. I've sacrificed my life to wipe your chin." The lies hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He hadn't paid a dime. He was draining my pension, siphoning funds from the joint account I had foolishly added him to after my stroke. And the meals were frozen dinners thrown into a microwave by his wife, who wouldn't even look me in the eye when she dropped the plastic tray on my bedside table. They were living off the marrow of my life, feasting on my legacy while waiting for me to die. "You've spent my money, Julian," I corrected him, my voice dropping an octave. "There is a difference. You haven't paid a bill since 2010.
He grabbed my arm. His grip was hard, bruising. His fingers dug into the loose flesh of my bicep, pinching the muscle against the bone. It was a violation. It was the moment the pretense of care evaporated, leaving only the naked violence of his greed. "You listen to me, you old leech," he hissed, leaning down until his face was inches from mine. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, a sour chemical tang. "You're signing. I don't care if I have to guide your hand myself. You're incompetent. Everyone knows it. One call to doctor."
Evans and I can have you declared unfit before dinner. I control the narrative, old man. I control the world outside this room. The physical pain of his grip was nothing compared to the heartbreak. It is a specific kind of hell to realize the monster under your bed is your own flesh and blood. It is a sorrow that hollows you out, leaving you brittle and dry. I looked at his hand on my arm, the white knuckles, the expensive watch I had bought him for his graduation. I looked down at my walking stick leaning against the nightstand. He saw a piece of wood. He saw a crutch for a cripple. I saw a vault. Inside that hollowed-out oak was a document that would burn his entire world to ash. If you have ever held a secret that could destroy the people who hurt you, or if you know what it's like to be underestimated because of your age, take a moment to subscribe, because I am about to show you that the heaviest things we carry aren't made of wood, they're made of the truth. And the truth is about to break my son's back. I pulled my arm away. I jerked it back with a strength that surprised him. I reached for the stick. I stood up, leaning heavily on it, letting the wood take my weight, letting it become the third leg of a tripod that would not be toppled. "Get out of my room," I said. Julian laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound, devoid of humor. It was the sound of a man who thinks he has already won. "Your room?" he mocked. "It's my house, old man. I'm just letting you rot in it a little longer. Noon. Be ready. And put on a clean shirt. You smell like dust." He turned and slammed the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. The photo of his mother, my Eleanor, shifted crookedly on its hook. I waited. I stood there in the center of the room, listening. I waited until his heavy footsteps faded down the hall. I waited until I heard him yelling at his wife in the kitchen, his voice muffled by the walls, but the tone unmistakably cruel. I waited until the house settled back into its uneasy silence. Then I hobbled to the door and locked it. The click of the deadbolt was a small victory. I sat back down on the bed and pulled the walking stick onto my lap. It was heavy, substantial. I ran my hands over the grain, feeling the imperfections, the history. I had carved this stick myself 20 years ago from an oak tree that had fallen on the property during a winter storm. It was a part of this land. It was a part of me. I unscrewed the rubber ferrule at the bottom. Then I gripped the heavy brass handle at the top. It was a mechanism I had designed myself years ago, back when I was an engineer, back when my hands were steady and my mind was sharp. It was a simple threaded seal, invisible to the naked eye unless you knew exactly where to look and which way to twist. I applied pressure. The handle turned. It moved smoothly, greased and maintained in secret during the long, lonely nights of my confinement. It came off with a soft metallic click. I peered inside the hollow shaft of the oak. It was dark, a narrow tunnel drilled through the heart of the wood. I could see the edge of the rolled-up parchment. It was still there, safe, untouched. My real will. The one that disinherited Julian completely. The one that outlined his theft, his abuse, and his gambling debts, accompanied by copies of the bank statements I had intercepted and hidden before he could destroy them. It was a dossier of his sins, legally binding and ready to detonate. I reached in with my pinky finger, just touching the edge of the paper. It felt cool and crisp. I didn't take it out. It wasn't time yet. The trap had to be sprung in front of a witness. The notary was coming. She would be the audience for his destruction. I screwed the brass handle back on. I twisted it tight, sealing the chamber. I tightened it until my knuckles turned white, until the brass bit into my palm. I heard the doorbell ring downstairs, a cheerful two-tone chime that sounded obscene in this house of misery. The notary. I stood up again. I grabbed the stick. Tap, tap, tap. I walked to the full-length mirror on the back of the closet door. I looked at the man staring back at me. My skin was gray, papery. My eyes were sunken. My cardigan was slightly too large for my shrinking frame. I looked frail. I looked beatable. I looked like a victim. That was my camouflage. Julian expected a victim. He expected a confused, frightened old man who would sign his name just to make the shouting stop. He didn't expect a general. He didn't know that the frail old man in the mirror was merely a shell, and inside that shell was a burning, cold rage that had been forged in the fires of his betrayal. I unlocked the door and walked into the hallway. I moved slowly, exaggerating the limp, dragging my left foot slightly. I let the cane hit the floor with a heavy, clumsy thud. I could hear Julian putting on his good son voice downstairs. It was a voice that made my stomach turn. "Yes, Miss
Perkins, he is a bit confused these days," Julian was saying, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "It's hard to watch, really. But he knows it's for the best. He wants to simplify his estate. We just want to make sure he's comfortable." I stopped at the top of the stairs. I looked down at the foyer. I saw the top of Julian's head. I saw the notary, a woman with a briefcase and a polite smile. I gripped the stick. I squeezed the brass handle. I wasn't going down there to sign. I wasn't going down there to surrender. I was going down there to war, and I was bringing the only weapon I needed, hidden in plain sight, carried in the hand of the man they thought was too weak to fight. I took the first step. Tap. The sound echoed through the house like a gavel. Tap. I descended. Tap. The rhythm of the cane was the rhythm of judgment, and court was about to be in session. I reached the bottom of the stairs. Julian looked up. He smiled that shark smile, extending a hand to guide me, to control me. "Here he is," he announced. "Come on, Dad. Careful on the rug." I ignored his hand. I walked past him, the cane striking the floor with purpose. I walked into the living room where the papers were waiting. I walked toward the table where my legacy was supposed to be stolen. I sat down. I placed the cane against the table, right next to my hand. Julian thought the cane was my crutch. He thought it was the symbol of my decay. He was about to find out that it was the instrument of his ruin. "Let's get this over with," I said. My voice was dry as dust. Julian pulled out the pen. He uncapped it. He pointed to the line. "Right here, Dad. Just sign right here." I looked at the pen. I looked at the cane. I looked at my son. And I smiled. It was a small, thin smile. The smile of a man who knows exactly where the landmines are buried, because he buried them himself. "I'm ready," I whispered. But I wasn't reaching for the pen. I was reaching for the handle of the stick. The stage was set. The audience was seated. It was time to break the silence. The living room was staged with the grotesque precision of a funeral parlor, designed to comfort the mourners while the body was still warm enough to sign a check. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my hand gripping the brass handle of my walking stick until the metal bit into my palm. I took a moment to breathe, inhaling the scent of the room. It smelled of lemon polish and fake vanilla, Julian's attempt to mask the underlying odor of betrayal that had permeated these walls for the last 3 years. He had opened the heavy velvet drapes, letting the noon sun flood the space, illuminating dust motes that danced in the light like tiny, chaotic memories. On the coffee table, a silver platter held a stack of store-bought cookies, arranged in a perfect pyramid. It was a pathetic touch. He thought a sugar cookie would make me forget that he was about to steal the roof over my head. "Julian," announced, his voice booming with a jovial falseness that made my teeth ache. "The man of the hour. Come on in, Dad. Careful on the rug." I looked at him. He was wearing a suit that was too tight across the shoulders, a remnant of a time when he had money and a gym membership. Now he just had the debt and the bloat of cheap scotch. He extended a hand toward me, palm up, like he was coaxing a frightened dog out of a crate. I ignored his hand. I walked past him, driving the rubber tip of my walking stick into the hardwood floor with deliberate force. Thud. I moved toward the dining table, my gait slow and uneven,
playing the part he had written for me. Miss Perkins, the notary, sat at the head of the table. She was a woman of indeterminate age with sensible glasses and a face that looked like it was carved out of worry. She had a briefcase open in front of her and a heavy, self-inking stamp resting on a stack of documents. She looked up as I approached, her eyes scanning me with a mixture of professional assessment and pity. She saw the cardigan hang loosely on my frame. She saw the shuffle. She saw the victim. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice soft. "Good afternoon. I'm Miss—" "Afternoon," I grunted, lowering myself into the high-backed oak chair opposite her. I leaned the walking stick against the table edge, positioning it carefully so it was within inches of my right hand. It wasn't just a prop. It was the detonator. Julian pulled out the chair next to me, scraping the legs loudly against the floor. He sat down, bringing with him a wave of nervous heat and the distinct acrid smell of nervous sweat. "Dad knows why we're here," Julian said quickly, cutting off any pleasantries Miss Perkins might have intended to offer. "We've discussed it extensively. He's ready to simplify." He looked at me. His eyes were wide, manic. They pleaded with me to play along, while threatening me with consequences if I didn't.
"Sign the paper," his eyes said, "or you die alone in the dark." "Simplify," I repeated, tasting the word. "It's a quitclaim deed, Mr. Thorne," Miss Perkins said, sliding a thick document across the polished wood. "It transfers the title of this property, 14 Harrow Lane, from yourself to your son, Julian Thorne, for the sum of $1. I looked at the paper. It was heavy stock, cream-colored. The lines were crisp. It was a beautiful instrument of theft. $1, I murmured. "I built this house in 1974. I laid the bricks myself. The materials alone cost $40,000 back then." "It's a formality, Dad," Julian hissed, leaning in close, his knee bouncing under the table and shaking the silverware. "It keeps the estate taxes down. We're doing this for the family trust." I asked, looking him dead in the eye. Julian flinched. He hadn't expected a question. He expected a nod and a signature. From the market? From probate? You know this. We talked about this yesterday when you were—" He looked at Miss Perkins and tapped his temple subtly, a gesture meant to imply that my mind was a sieve. "I understand," I said to the notary, ignoring him. Miss Perkins uncapped her pen. "Very well." She held the pen out to me. I didn't take it. I let my hands rest on the table, still and heavy. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical weight that pressed down on the room. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to grow louder, counting down the seconds of Julian's composure. Miss Perkins dropped the pen. It rolled across the document, leaving a small black tick mark near the signature line. "Huh," Julian laughed, a high-pitched, strangled sound. He reached out and patted my shoulder hard. Okay, he's having an episode. Miss Perkins, I warned you about this. He gets paranoid in the afternoons. It's the sundowning." "I don't have dementia, Julian," I said. I turned my head slowly to look at him. I stripped away the confusion I had been wearing for months. I let him see the cold, hard intelligence that had built a construction empire from nothing. "I have a bank statement," I said clearly, "from the joint savings account." Julian's face went slack. The color drained out of him like water from a tub. "I saw the withdrawal from last Tuesday," I continued. $40,000, wired to an account linked to a Mr. Vincent Moretti. Who is Vinny, Julian? Is he a doctor?" Julian's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out.
I asked. Miss Perkins gasped. She pushed her chair back, the legs screeching against the wood. "Mr. Thorne." Julian snapped. The humiliation was too much. The exposure was too raw. The facade of the loving, burdened son shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, revealing the desperate, violent animal underneath. He screamed. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward, crashing to the floor. "You shut your mouth, old man. You don't know what you're talking about. You're senile." "I know you're broke," I said, my voice steady as a rock. "I know you need this house to pay off Vinny before he breaks your legs." Julian roared. He lunged across the table. He grabbed the lapels of my cardigan and shook me. My head snapped back and forth. "Sir!" Miss Perkins shouted, standing up and fumbling for her phone. "You shut your mouth!" yelled at her, his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He turned back to me. "You think you're smart? You think you can hold this over me? I wiped your ass, old man." "You own nothing," I spat in his face. He let go of me. He looked around wildly, searching for something to destroy, something to vent the nuclear rage building in his chest. His eyes landed on the walking stick. It was leaning against the table, heavy and calm. The symbol of my weakness, the symbol of his burden. "I am sick of you," he screamed. "I am sick of this damn stick tapping all day and night. Tap, tap, tap." He grabbed the stick. He ripped it from my reach before I could stop him. He held it up like a club. It was heavy English oak, solid and formidable. I shouted, half rising from my chair. "You can keep it," he bellowed, raising the stick high above his head. "But you're going to rot in it. I'm leaving you here. I'm cutting the power." I pleaded, reaching out. Not for him. For the stick. He didn't listen. In a blind, white-hot fury, he brought the walking stick down hard over the back of the solid oak dining chair he had just vacated. Crack. The sound was explosive. It sounded like a gunshot in the enclosed room. The wood shrieked and gave way. My walking stick, the one I had carried for 10 years, the one I had carved myself, snapped cleanly in half. Splinters flew through the air. The top half, the handle, went spinning across the room and hit the wall. The bottom half clattered to the floor. Julian stood there, heaving, his chest rising and falling. He looked at the broken wood. He looked at me. He expected to see me broken.
He expected to see me weeping for my lost support, crumbling into a pile of helpless old bones. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the floor. From the hollow center of the broken bottom shaft, something had fallen out. It wasn't dust. It wasn't rot. It was a tight roll of thick, cream-colored parchment. It had been packed perfectly into the bored-out core of the cane. It rolled across the hardwood floor, unfurling slightly as it came to a stop at Miss Perkins' feet. Silence descended on the room. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Julian looked down. He blinked, the adrenaline fog clearing just enough for confusion to set in. He whispered. He dropped the piece of wood he was still holding. He took a step toward the paper. "Don't touch it," I commanded. My voice wasn't weak anymore. It wasn't raspy. It was the voice of a father who had finally run out of forgiveness. Miss Perkins bent down. She was shaking, but her professional curiosity and her sense of duty took over. She picked up the scroll. She unrolled it. "Money? Did you hide cash in there?" Miss Perkins read the header. Her eyes went wide behind her glasses. She looked at me, a look of dawn breaking over a dark horizon. Then she looked at Julian with pure ice. "It's a last will and testament," she whispered. "Dated?" Julian lunged for her. She pulled it back. "This is a legal document, Mr. Thorne. Read it," I said. Miss Perkins cleared her throat. Her hands trembled, but her voice was strong. "If you are reading this," she began. Julian froze. He stared at the paper as if it were a snake. "If you are reading this, you have broken my walking stick. You have broken the only thing that was supporting me. In doing so, you have revealed your true nature. I knew you hated the sound of it." Julian looked at me. His face was the color of ash. "You?" Miss Perkins continued reading. "This document revokes all previous wills and trusts. It details the account numbers of the offshore trusts you didn't know about, the ones containing the bulk of my estate. Those trusts are now irrevocably transferred to the saint." "No," Julian whispered. "Furthermore," Miss Perkins read, her voice gaining steel, "the breaking of this stick serves as the trigger clause for my immediate eviction of you from this property. The house is already in a living trust managed by the firm of Henderson and Associates.
You own nothing. You inherit nothing. Miss Perkins looked up.
She looked at the second sheet of paper attached to the will. Julian's hands began to shake. He looked at the broken wood on the floor. He looked at the paper. He looked at the ruin of his life, laid out in black ink. He choked out. "You set me up. You goaded me. You tapped that stick. You tapped it just to annoy me. I knew you were violent," I said. I stood up. I didn't reach for the table. I didn't reach for a chair. I stood up straight, my spine uncurling, my legs taking my weight without complaint. I had been faking the severity of my condition for 6 months. I had been doing squats in the room while he slept. I was stronger than he ever imagined. "I knew you were greedy," I said, taking a step toward him. "And I knew you couldn't control your temper. You broke the stick, Julian." I looked at Miss Perkins. "Did you?" I asked. "I did," she said. She reached for her phone again. "And I witnessed the threat. I'm calling the police, Mr. Thorne. And I'm calling Mr." Julian dropped to his knees. It wasn't a prayer. It was a collapse. The will fluttered to the floor, landing next to the splinters of the stick. He put his head in his hands. He began to sob, ugly, wet, terrified sobs. "Dad," he begged, "please, Vinny, he'll kill me if I don't have the money." "Then you should have thought about that before you stole from me," I said. I looked down at him. I felt a pang of sorrow, sharp and deep, for the child he used to be. But the man on the floor was a stranger. "You broke the stick, Julian," I said softly. "You can't put it back together." I walked past him. I stepped over the broken wood. I stepped over the man who would have sold me for $1. I walked to the large bay window overlooking the driveway. I parted the velvet curtains. I watched for the flashing lights of the police cars. I stood tall. I stood on my own 2 feet. The stick was gone, but my dignity was intact. The house was finally quiet, and the tapping had stopped forever.